All right, hello, 12s. We are moving on to Unit I. Oh, how poetic that Unit I is about the brain, which is you. In this first, first overview, what is the brain for? What is the nervous system for? We're covering the nervous system. The nervous system is for you to be a thing in the world, for you to find mates, for you to find food, for you to escape danger. It is basically the whole nervous system is takes inputs, sensory inputs, processes those inputs, and then makes actions, makes decisions, and you move. You decide to move. The nervous system also is in charge of homeostasis. Certain homeostatic functions are controlled by nerves. Heart rate, the vagus nerve, heart rate, breathing rate, those types of things, which we've covered in some of those other units. So homeostasis, responding to your environment. It's what makes animals unique versus plants. Plants don't have a nervous system. They don't hear you talking to them. They don't. And they don't cry when you cut them down. They do communicate chemically with each other, but it's very slow and nothing like ours. Ours is fast, metabolic. It requires a lot of ATP. It requires a lot of energy for our nervous system to work. Something like 80% is something crazy high like that of our energy usage is right up here, right in there. That thing that you got in there. That's an average. Some folks, probably don't use the full 80% of their energy. I'm kidding. It's an important part. So let's talk about, in this first unit, we're going to talk about the brain and the spinal cord. And the brain and the spinal cord, what those are, there's more to it than just the brain and this spinal cord. Will this work? Look, I can make a little worm appear on the thing. The brain and the spinal cord. So we could divide. We're going to talk about the anatomy. Let's just talk a little bit about the anatomy, the actual physical anatomy of our immune system, of the nervous system. So it's divided into two main anatomical sections: the central nervous system, the CNS, and the central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord. It is at the center. It looks really good. It looks like this. There we go. This is an even better. So this is the brain and spinal cord. That is the central nervous system. And then the other division is the peripheral nervous system. And the peripheral nervous system is all the nerves that go all throughout your body that don't include the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, I'm sorry, I just discovered this. So your brain and spinal cord are set up in development. They develop early on in embryonic development. Look, here is a very early embryo. I don't know how nervous system begins. Well, as an infant tissue, it doesn't say when, how early this is. A, B. We don't have labels for it. And what happens is, so you imagine you're looking at the embryo here, and what's starting to already set up is a front or an anterior and a posterior. Can you see that? That's the top and the bottom. We say anterior and we say posterior because most vertebrates don't stand upright like we do. So this is the front where they're facing this way and they're hunched over. And then there is a dorsal side, so that's the back, that's the part facing out back, and a ventral side, part facing out front. Those are the planes. So here what we're looking at is the dorsal side. This is the dorsal side. It's already being established. And what happens is in this dorsal side, the cells, so this is the embryo, the cells are dividing, still not too many cells, still lots of cells, but the cells are dividing. And so here we're looking at a cross section. Can we zoom in on this? Yes, there we go. We're looking at a cross section of the dorsal side. This would be where we've taken this thing. We've taken this thing and we've flipped it this way. And that's what we're looking at. And what starts to happen is these cells here, they start to invagulate, enfold. They fold in. And they continue folding. Look, they're starting to fold. They're starting to fold here. You got this fold forming. And then the tops of the fold fuse. And you have what's called a neural tube. And this will be the spinal cord. There's also here a notochord, and that is a sort of like a harder tissue. This should, if I'm not mistaken, develop into actually the vertebrae that surround the spinal cord, because you have vertebrae that protect your spinal cord from damage, because the spinal cord is very, very, very important. It sends signals up and down, communicates with your limbs, your sensors in your limbs. And so there you go. It pinches off, and now you've made a spinal cord, and these cells will specialize to become nerve cells, and this will fill in, and they'll become nerve cells. And then what will happen is that will form the spinal cord running up and down, and at the top, so we've already specialized that this is the top or the anterior end, not at the posterior. You don't get a bum brain. There were some dinosaurs that had a brain in their tail. But we don't. So you don't think with your butt, you think with the top of your head. So then a sort of cavity will form at this anterior end. And there it is. And then it closes over, and in there the brain will develop at the top, connected to the spinal cord. And then from that, out here, you will start to get nerves growing out into the embryo. Basically, cells will differentiate to become nerves that join up with the spinal cord. So that's how the central nervous system forms, and then the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nerves grow extending out from the central nervous system at the various tissues and while organs develop. So there are actually 43 pairs of extensions of nerves from here. Here they are. Look at all of these, nerves, and somebody has gone. Where are they? Here's some. So there you go. So cervical. So you've got, this is the 43. So you've got neck muscles, diaphragm, deltoid, shoulders, heading to your shoulders, your wrists, your triceps, fingers, on and on and on and on and on. And you can see there's 12 cranial nerves that extend in the head out of the brain. So they connect to, the mouth and the face. And this one runs to the vagus, heart, lungs, bronchi, intestinal tract, sensory, heart, lungs, inner ear. Important, you carry a lot of sensory organs in your head. So this is an important bit of nerves. And remember, things are going in and things are going out. This is a breakdown of what things look like. While we're targeting here, sensory and motor neurons. So I guess we can. Well, look at the central. So we talked about central. We talked about the peripheral nervous system. And so what does the central nervous system do? The central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord, and it coordinates the conscious and subconscious activity of your body. So it coordinates the things that you want to do, like, I want to move my hand here. And then the subconscious stuff, which is like, my heart has to beat faster, or like, I'm getting goosebumps on here. That's controlled by your nerves, and I'm starting to sweat. Things like that. subconscious, and conscious things. The peripheral nervous system connects the rest of the body to the central nervous system, and it contains both things going in and things going out. Now, things going in, those are called sensory nerves or sensory neurons. We'll make the distinction between nerves and neurons in a second. And then we also have motor neurons and motor neurons. Sensory neurons are coming from, they're coming from sensors and receptors, sensory parts of your body. And motor neurons, they head out and they basically connect to muscles. And when they send a signal, muscles contract, muscle fibers contract. So they connect to muscle fibers. They also contract to glands. So motor neurons will also connect to glands, and so that glands can release hormones. So you can release certain hormones. What does this look like in the spinal cord? So what do we have here? So at the anterior end, we have what's called the dorsal root. And that is where sensory neurons connect to the spinal cord. There's a sensory neuron, and there's a sensory neuron coming in. At the ventral root, so that this is the front. I'm doing it on here, so I can do it with this. I'm getting all confused between real world and not real world. So this is the front of the animal, or the underside if you're a dog. But for humans, this would be your front. Your chest would be that way. This would be your back is that way, so your chest is that way, and this is where the motor neurons come. So signals go out to motor neurons. Now, in between here, there are also intermediate neurons. Am I naming them right? Am I naming right, Mr. K? Interneurons. We'll talk about those in just a second. Okay, so that's that's some general anatomy. That's some good anatomy. And we've talked about the central nervous system, and we talked about the peripheral nervous system. And the peripheral nervous system is divided into two subdivisions. The autonomic nervous system, which is involuntary. We don't have any control of it. That's that background stuff for maintaining homeostasis, or for fight or flight, and for doing things. So look, you've got, and that autonomic nervous system is divided then further into parasympathetic and sympathetic, and all of these, they stimulate various activities or inhibit various activities in your body depending on what you need to do. If you need to go into action, into fight, you will be doing the sympathetic stuff. If you need to just relax and don't need to be fighting, you'll be, just eat your food, digest your food, you'll be doing parasympathetic things. And then as well, so that peripheral nervous system, the other subdivision is the somatic nervous system, and that is the conscious, voluntary control that you have over your body, where you go, I am going to lift my right arm, and you lift your right arm, and there it is. Look at that. I'm doing that. I'm sending signals are traveling from my brain down my spinal cord out the ventral side of my spinal cord down to the muscles in my arm, and they're contracting muscles in my arm. At the same time, receptors are signaling going back and telling my brain where in space my arm is and whether it's lifting or not. Also, there's lots of signals coming from my eyes, looking at this thing, looking at that. My brain is trying to figure out how to do all of this control this and see this at the same time and control it on here. Fun stuff like that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the central nervous system, back to the central nervous system, and talk about the brain, the anatomy of our brain. So we've got a fairly, it's a pretty unique brain. This area here So this region of our brain, sort of this with all the folds and stuff in it, it's called the cerebrum, and this is where we do all of our thinking and coordinating it. The parts of the cerebrum are broken down into, there's motor centers here where you can send this area, sort of the thinking, rationalizing area. So if you're in a car crash and you smash this up, you damage it, you might do crazy stuff, things like that. So let's just go through some of these bits, and then I think that's it for this for this sort of the anatomy stuff. So parts of the brain, you have the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata, it's sort of the reflexive center, so that means it monitors body functions, responds to reflective change. So it has to do with like saliva. It's also mainly what we know it as, and what a good way to remember is that it's the respiratory center. So it monitors CO2 and hydrogen ions in the blood, and then can control your breathing rate as well. It can speed up your heart. Remember, it can do that as well. Cerebrum. So that's so where is the medulla oblongata before we go? And so we find the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata is down here. So this is like your lizard brain. Basically, if you don't damage this part of your brain, you can wreck all of this other stuff. You'll still be alive. Your heart will still beat, and you'll still breathe. You won't be doing any thinking. You won't be doing any walking, any of that other stuff. You won't be, but this is what we call a vegetative state, is what happens to people. If they're in that's why you need to wear a helmet. That's why helmet laws exist, is so you don't damage this and then end up just running on your medulla oblongata, on your worm brain, your lizard brain. What else we got to talk about? Oh, thalamus and the hypothalamus. So what the thalamus does, there's, where is it? Thalamus. The thalamus is around here. Hypothalamus is underneath here. They're both around there. And the thalamus, what it does is it sorts. So as stuff travels up to the brain, sensory stuff travels up to the brain, thalamus is like, oh, okay, this has to do with balance. This is from the eyes, so send it to the eye bit. This is auditory, where the auditory bit, send it to the auditory bit. This is something more abstract. Let's send it to the abstract thought kind of area. It's just sorting. So example, visualized stimuli gets directed to the visual center of the brain. Hypothalamus, so again, it's kind of like the medulla oblongata works with it. It's the homeostatic center, monitors internal body conditions and initiates responses to maintain homeostasis. So a lot more. So monitors blood pressure, blood volume, temperature, and it's kind of the link with the nervous system and the endocrine system. And the endocrine system, remember, endocrine is no ducts. So endocrine system is hormones being secreted into the blood. So things like oxytocin will be secreted here. Things that have to do with your kidneys. So controlling your hypothalamus will is basically maintaining homeostasis. So controlling how much water is reabsorbed in your kidneys, so that your blood volume and your blood pressure, if you don't reabsorb water, if you reabsorb a lot of water from your urine, so you drink a lot of water and you don't reabsorb a lot of water, your blood becomes dehydrated and your blood pressure drops. If you do reabsorb a lot of water, then your blood pressure will go up. Your blood volume goes up. There's more water. There's more fluid in your plasma, and your blood pressure goes up. So that's one of the ways. That's one of the things that. And so there's a hormone that is released. So your hypothalamus monitors what's going on in your kidneys, and depending on what your blood volume is like, and it will secrete this hormone. For the life of me, I can't remember the name of this hormone right now. You know what we're going to do? We're going to go to the urinary system notes, and I'm going to find this hormone. It is called antidiuretic hormone, ADH. There it is. And it's secreted from the pituitary gland, which is connected to the hypothalamus. There's the hypothalamus. There's the pituitary gland, anterior and posterior, and it comes from the posterior pituitary gland. Okay, so ADH. And so nervous system. Let's go back to the nervous system. Sorry about that. There we go. So your hypothalamus is doing stuff like that, and it's using hormones. And your hypothalamus talks to your pituitary gland, which is just this little lobe thing. And so there's posterior and anterior pituitary gland. And how it communicates with the two glands, so the two parts of the posterior and the anterior pituitary gland, is so there's two actually systems. So what will happen is there are nerves in the hypothalamus. Let me just get it right. There are nerves in the hypothalamus. Oh, I'm really messing this up. And so the nerves in the hypothalamus, they extend into the anterior pituitary gland. See, I'm messing this up. And what happens is they produce hormones. Those nerves, actually, they come from the hypothalamus down into, and you know what I'm. Okay, so I found a better image. This will help us work this out. Here we go. Here's the hypothalamus. It's right above, and hanging down below is the pituitary gland. Here's the posterior pituitary and the anterior pituitary. And so there's two ways that things are controlled here. So for the posterior pituitary, forget whatever I said earlier. I'm not going to edit that out. You see me you struggle with this, and then that's why I feel bad, giving tests, because even I have trouble remembering. There's so much info in this course. But here we go. So there's two ways to control stuff. There's two ways that it's connected. So here's nerve cells. So these are nerve cells that connect the hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary. And so what happens is these nerve cells will actually produce hormones, and they produce ADH, so that antidiuretic hormone, so that's controlling blood volume, and oxytocin as well. And what happens is those hormones are secreted from these nerves into a capillary bed, and then out it goes and those hormones will head to their target issues, so ADH tissues, and will do what they need to do. So ADH will actually go to the kidneys and will control reabsorption of water from urine. So when you make urine, you actually put out a lot of water into your urine initially, and then you pull that water back out, and you leave the wastes. So and this will control your blood volume and your blood pressure. Oxytocin, example stuff that happens in oxytocin, we talked about this when we talked about positive feedback metabolic pathways. Oxytocin, so a baby presses down on the uterus, that sends a signal to the brain, that sends a signal to the hypothalamus to produce more oxytocin, dump the oxytocin into the bloodstream, and then that oxytocin goes to the uterus and causes the muscles around the uterus to contract, which pushes the baby against the cervix even more, which the cervix sends a signal to the hypothalamus to send more oxytocin, more contractions, on and on until the baby is birthed. So that's one way. The other way that the hypothalamus communicates with the pituitary is, so there are nerves here, and what they release is these nerves either release or inhibiting hormones, depending on conditions. And so those hormones go, and there's a whole bunch of cells here in the anterior pituitary that produce various hormones. So if you send a specific releasing hormone, that will stimulate the secretion of an anterior pituitary hormone. And so here's FSH and LH. Those control a woman's cycle, a menstrual cycle. So those do that. And they also can initiate puberty. Growth hormone, so regrowing things, growing is sent from here. adrenocortico ACTH, which will stimulate the adrenal cortex, which is on the top of your kidneys, and will activate fight or flight or get you adrenaline. So how this works is, so there's the releasing and the inhibiting hormone travel down what's called this portal system, this pituitary portal system. So basically capillaries at one end and a vein that connects more capillaries at the other end. And so, here the hypothalamus is these nerve cells are making the hormones and they're going out of the pituitary. Here, the hypothalamus is sending hormones that tell the pituitary to make the hormones and then send them out, or to stop making the hormones or make less of them, so slow your growth down, or control the menstrual cycle. So it's just how your brain, the nervous part of your brain, controls the endocrine part of your body, the hormonal part of your body. Okay, that was way longer. Cerebellum. Cerebellum's here at the back of the brain. It's this big, huge chunk at the back of your brain that controls, it coordinates. It's huge because walking and balancing is really hard. It's not an easy thing to do. So there's these things called proprioceptors all throughout your body. They're just basically cells that are sitting there that feel you moving and tell the cerebellum where in space your limbs are. These, of course, huge cause problems if you have an amputation. There are phantom limbs. That's phantom firing, potentially phantom firing. Scientists are still trying to figure out. We don't, but so you get these phantom feeling of having an arm there, and sometimes people feel that the arm is doing, it's in this contraction or something like that. And often how the technique that's been discovered that helps is people put a mirror, so they can put their limb that they haven't lost in the mirror, so it looks like the limb that they have lost is in the mirror. It looks like they still have the limb, and that actually will send signals to your cerebellum and kind of reset your brain, and it will make it think that limb is still there and it's not in this clenched fist. Brain magic. So the cerebellum is huge. So it from proprioceptors, it's detecting your inner ear has a fluid in it that is if your head tilts, the fluid will move up the wall of the container that it's in, and there's little sensory cells in that container, and they can tell how that fluid is moving, and it tells the cerebellum how your head is oriented, what your head is doing, as well as signals from the eyes. Old people fall down because those sensors, that area, that fluid dries up and things get wrecked in there, and so they don't have a very good sense of balance. That's when older people start to lose their balance. They become more prone to falls. If you watch astronauts hopping around on the moon, you see them hopping, and then sometimes they just fall over. That's because that fluid, the gravity is so low on the moon that fluid is moving around not the way that your body expects it to. And what happens is your brain starts to rely more on your eyes, on the visual input. The cerebellum relies more on your visual input to figure out how its head is oriented. And sometimes if you're just staring into space and it's relying on the visual input, you just fall over. The eyes are not as good as those that fluid in your inner ear. And also it's monitoring things like the pressure that is on your foot, when you're walking, the balance, where the muscles are. So if you just imagine all the stuff that it takes for you to walk. It took you a while to walk when you were a little baby. This whole area was developing when you were a baby to learn how to walk. And then you've been walking ever since and getting better and better and better. You can watch for years children, how they get better and better and better at walking and moving and finding their body in space. Next is pons. The pons are located, there we go, there's the pons. And what the pons does is basically, so if there's a regular signal coming into your brain from wherever, from your ears, from your eye. I mean, I'm not okay. Eyes maybe not so much, but just a regular sensory signal, and it's not some crazy. It's not a strong. It's not a whole bunch of neurons, and so this would be something like my shirt. So right now my shirt is rubbing on my skin, and there are sensors in my skin that are firing because there's pressure from the shirt that are firing to my brain. But I'm not bothered. I mean, I am now because I've said it. I can feel my shirt, but normally you don't feel your shirt. There's a river rushing, or a fan running. Is there a fan? There's a fan running in here. You can sleep with that fan on, because what happens is what the pons does when there's this regular signal being sent to the brain, the pons is like, I don't think it's very important, so I'm just going to ignore it. So it basically doesn't send that signal further up the chain. It filters out what are deemed unimportant stimuli. That's why, if you go to a hotel room and there's an air conditioner in there and it's running, and it just runs at a steady state, it will not wake you up. But as soon as that air conditioner stops and it makes some kind of noise like that, the pons will be, well, that's a new thing. Let's send that over and wake you up. Watching these videos, my voice, if I don't modulate my voice enough or do this, you guys probably fall asleep because your pons is like, I keep hearing this and you start to fall asleep. So your pons is filtering unimportant stimuli. And finally, corpus callosum, that is this area here. Where's the corpus? The corpus callosum there. And what it does is do we have a good shot of the brain here? Give me a good shot. It's a good shot of the two hemispheres. Your brain is divided in two. Where's a picture of the two hemispheres? There we go. There's a picture of the two hemispheres of the brain. So this is from the underside. So you got one hemisphere, the other hemisphere. What are we? Is this left or right? This would be the right side of the brain. This is the left side of the brain. And so they're connected here, but these two sides of the brain are not. They're connected through that cerebellum. No, through the corpus callosum. Sorry, through the corpus callosum. So they're connected through the corpus callosum. And so all the signals. So when you're putting stuff together, stuff travels through the corpus callosum. In extreme cases of epilepsy, when medications don't work, when I guess basically, the therapies, medications don't work. I don't know if they do shock therapy. There used to be shock therapy for epilepsy. There is still a thing, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm not up to date on 21st century brain treatments. Even though my mom worked at BC Children's Hospital in the brain unit for kids, but I could never listen to the stories, unfortunately, because they're often horrendously tragic, and I don't want to know, and especially now that I have my own kids. So in extreme cases, epilepsy is like a firing. Signals get sort of crazy. The brain sort of gets short-circuited. I don't know if that's the right thing, but basically there's all this firing across, and then things get sent out to the motor neurons that shouldn't be sent out. So there's palsies and twitches, and that's sort of an epilepsy, and that the senses shut down because there's all this activity, that electrical activity that's being generated in the brain that shouldn't be there. So one of the extreme cases, one of the treatments is actually cutting the corpus callosum. And therefore, those signals can't make it to the other side, and sometimes that helps, or at least it reduces the seizures. So this would be, in case of really severe, extreme seizures, this would be cut. Okay, so that's sort of a journey, like, to give you just a sense of some of the parts of the brain. and the anatomy of the of your nervous system. You've got an idea now, right? You've got an idea how things are controlled and sort of what your brain does. There's a lot we don't know about the brain. It's the most complicated, some people say it's the most complicated thing on earth is the human brain. Definitely, there's layers and layers of complication on the brain. And if you think about it, what's interesting about us trying to figure out how the brain works, that's the brain trying to figure out how the brain works. So that's weird. And how does the thing study itself? That's what it's doing, because you are the brain. But your brain is not separate. You are right now, you're looking at this screen. That's your brain processing and looking at the screen. That's the visual center, the auditory center, all coordinating. You are remembering, oh, that's Mr. K, that's a teacher, this is a screen, all that stuff is going on in your brain, and all those associations are happening up here in the cerebrum. Not to mention you're balancing whatever. Maybe you're watching this video while you're taking a poop. There's all of that stuff happening. So your autonomic nervous system you're pooping, coordinating the muscles of your digestive system. All of those things are happening and are controlled by your nervous system. Okay, I leave you on pooping.